Thank you for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be up here speaking in front of you guys. All my friends have stopped listening. So I'm going to start off with a story. In 1968, Apollo 8 set off to orbit the moon. It was the first time man was leaving the influence of Earth's gravity. It was the first time man was going to go to another astronomical object. And if you're wondering what the term moonshots came from, it's safe to say this was it. The entire world held their breath as the bravest humanity had to offer was heading off into the great unknown. The BBC alone was airing this event in over 54 countries, in over 15 different languages. And when they came back, they were obviously hailed as heroes. And it wasn't so much about the information that they came back about the moon that was interesting. That wasn't their largest contribution to society at large. It was this. For the first time, man set eyes on home, Earthrise. Around their fourth orbit around the moon, they saw the Earth appearing above the horizon. And the entire world set their eyes on the Earth for the first time. And while pictures of the Earth are prevalent everywhere now, picture a time when that wasn't the case. I mean, now we have 3 different emojis for our planet. But picture a time when we hadn't seen what our world looked like. Picture what that does to somebody. The picture went on to inspire Earth Day, the world's largest secular observance. And over 1 billion people practice it year after year till this date. And it kickstarted the environmental movement, which is why that photograph was hailed as one of the 100 most influential photographs that changed the world. And the only reason that took place, the only reason that something that was started off with global conflict, which was the US space program, which was essentially an intellectual and financial flex over the Soviets. It changed the conversation from conflict to conservation. As astronauts subsequently went up to space, and they saw the Earth from a completely different perspective, there was a change in their psyche that ended up taking place. They came back as different people. The Earth was completely breathtaking. It was unbelievably tiny. It was unbelievably fragile. And essentially, it was too small for conflict. It was only big enough for collaboration. And this is what is known as the overview effect. From space, borders tend to vanish. From space, human conflict becomes trivial and petty. And the reason this happened was because these astronauts have a unique perspective on Earth. It's not something everybody can do. And if you think about the average life on Earth, we're so trapped by short-term gains, right? There's a checklist of things that you have to do. You have to graduate from college, you have to get your degree, get a job, find a partner, settle down, be financially well off. And you're constantly trapped in short-term gains. And we forget that we do have to take care of our planet as well. And this is purely down to the way the information is presented to us. Societal pressures are far stronger than something that you have to think about every now and then. And essentially, if changing your perspective can have such a drastic impact on your mindset, the way these astronauts had, it can do a lot for your business as well. And that's precisely what I do. All I do is bring fresh perspective to clients. All I do is bring an interesting perspective to the creative teams that I work with. And that's where disruption comes from. And so when I started off as a brand strategist, I used to work at this agency called L&K Saatchi & Saatchi in the new business department and in the strategic planning department. With new business, week on week, I'm constantly being asked to understand a new industry, a new client, and week on week, I have to kind of adapt. I have to figure that out. I have to catch up to an industrial veteran. So how do I do that? And essentially, it's just about bringing a new perspective in. It's something that I can take from category A and apply to category B, lateral thinking in that sense. And that's why at Stone Soup, we've got a trusty little framework to bring that perspective into brands. And we start off with understanding a company, understanding their objectives, because just like man on earth, you tend to get lost in short-term gains. You tend to get lost about, you get lost in the pressures of figuring out where that next paycheck's going to come from. And you forget why you started off the company in the first place. So we sit down with the client and we understand exactly what they want to do, what their short-term goals are, what their long-term goals are. And subsequent to that, we challenge everything that they've learned. And of course, a lot of it gets validated, but we go out there and do the research ourselves. We speak to consumers directly, conducting Instagram polls if required. We understand cultural trends, societal trends. And the reason this is important is because while a joke might be really funny for your target group, for a large part of the audience, it could be supremely unfunny. And that's why it has the power to make or break your company. And similarly, we take that across and see what the category is doing, see what your competition is kind of doing to gain a consumer. Because eventually, our job is to stand apart. Our job is to differentiate ourselves, and that's where disruption comes from. So I'm going to walk you through 3 examples. And the reason that I've chosen these is because they show disruption in different ways. Disruption doesn't necessarily have to be this massive, earth-shaking thing. World for All was one of the first NGOs to digitize animal adoption. And essentially, they used to use Facebook to do this. Every once in a while, they'd put up a picture of a sorry-looking puppy or a sorry-looking kitten that they rescued and ask for help. And this stopped working after a period of time, and that's when they came to us. And they said, what can we do? So we went to the framework, and we understood that that on the left is what they were doing. And there is a sense of fatigue that comes in. If you're constantly asking people for help, you're not going to be successful in the long run. So we took that and flipped it on its head. Because the cultural insight was the internet was made for cats and dogs. It's something that transcends borders. It's something that transcends languages. It's something that everybody loves, and therefore is incredibly share-worthy. So we memified those pictures. We put up pictures and videos of these animals doing their own thing. And essentially, that made it very shareable. And it took their leads from an average of 1 a week to 5 a day. The next brand that I want to look at is Nua, which is a sanitary pad subscription service. And it's in a category which was dominated by 2 brands, Stay Free and Whisper. And those brands have deep pockets, so you do have to do something different to stand apart. And at the other end of the spectrum, there were a bunch of startups that were doing the exact same thing as Nua, which was customized sanitary pad subscription boxes. And therefore, it was a rat race at the bottom. So we took it to our framework, and we tried to understand what the larger conversation around menstruation was. When it came to a consumer, it's a product which simply cannot fail. So the risk of trial is really high. You can't have this product fail on you. So it was difficult for consumers to switch the brands that they were used to. And when it came to culture, it's such a hush-hush topic. There's so much taboo around it. And therefore, there was a need to start a conversation there, and not just something that you do as a one-off, but something that you keep going over a period of time, over a sustained period of time. And with the category, that's what was happening. People would have campaigns centered around, yes, we must talk about this, but nothing over a long period of time. So at the center of that, the strategy was about disruption and building a community for women to come out and talk. And essentially, we looked at what goes into making a community. And essentially, it was about information. It was about starting a conversation with women about what they wanted to know. We would get specialists on board. We would get gynecologists to do Instagram takeovers. We'd create memes. So Overreact would be a good example of that. And we'd be constantly debunking myths, because there was no conversation, there was a lot that people didn't know. there were a lot of problems that they didn't really know about in that sense. And in terms of what else goes into a community, it's engagement, right? So we made share-worthy content in terms of something that you can send to a friend of yours. So that meme vocabulary would be one of our best performing posts in that regard. The last bit was also inspiration, which is we started taking period stories and PMS stories, which eventually became a crowdsourced piece of content. The minute somebody saw one of those, they'd come in and share their own stories. And that led to Noah getting a second round of funding. The last form of disruption was something short-term. It was a campaign we did for Dot & Key, which is a skincare brand. And when we looked at what they wanted from us, they wanted us to launch a serum for them. And essentially, this was a category where the consumer was really well researched. Before they'd apply anything to their face, what they would do is really dive deep into the product. They'd look at the back of the bottle before they look at the front of it. And essentially, that's something that we were well aware about. And that led to a templatized launch campaign for every brand in the category. They would start off with the ingredients. They would talk about the benefits. They would talk about the problems they would solve. And it led to a degree of sameness that the category had for all of its communication. But when we looked at culture, what we realized is all of these campaigns were very reliant on influencers because they weren't selling, they were recommending. So here's what we did. We created a blind sale. We didn't reveal anything about the product. And we launched it with just 100 bottles. And we introduced paucity into the equation. The fact that there was just 100 bottles and nobody knew anything about the product completely polarized everyone. We also harnessed influencers to kind of recommend the product and figure out and review it. So they would actively use it, and they would just keep their fans and followers updated about how their skin is reacting. And essentially, that's all it took. The demand for this was tremendous. In 52 minutes, we managed to sell 100 bottles off, and that led to a higher demand for when we were actually launching. So subsequent to this, we'd hit people with the ingredients that go into it. We'd hit people with the problems it could solve for. And when it did finally hit the market, it was the top-selling SKU on Nykaa for 3 days straight. Nykaa is the biggest marketplace for skincare products in India, and all it took was taking the category narrative and flipping it on its head. So essentially, there's a lot of power that comes through perspective. A simple change in perspective can do a lot for disruption, and you don't always have to go to the moon for it. Thank you.